Hi, and welcome to this special edition of the NGINX Community Chats. During this chat, you're going to get a chance to learn about some things that are open sourcey, meet some of the people inside and outside of NGINX and F5 that are working in the open source space, maybe even learn something. I'm Dave McAllister, open source technologist here at NGINX. And with me today, I've got a special event because we have this brand new announcement we want to bring you to your attention. So with me today, getting into this, is Jodie Putrino and Mike Jang. Jodie, what do you do here at NGINX?
I'm a senior documentation manager, and I oversee all things documentation for NGINX at F5.
How about you, Mike?
I'm a principal technical writer here at NGINX, which means I get to document what's new and what's coming with our NGINX software and new features.
This is kind of really fascinating because most of the time when our community thinks about open source, they don't think about documentation. But yesterday in a conversation, it was pointed out that documentation is probably the driving force behind open source. Without good documentation, you're kind of dead in the water for this. So, what are y'all doing from the documentation side for open source? Does this mean that NGINX documentation itself is now open source? And is that just for the projects or is that also for the product side of the house?
So the docs for the open source core project have always been open source, but they haven't necessarily been that easy to find. They've kind of been hiding in plain sight, right? So we've always had that. We've had the Ingress controller and now the Gateway Fabric. Both of those projects have open source documentation in the context of their repositories. But as of last month, now every single piece of documentation source for NGINX is now publicly available in GitHub.
Wow, that's amazing. And so, Mike, what's your wish list? 6 months out, 12 months out, what do you hope to see accomplished, and are your criteria for success?
Criteria for success, what I want to see accomplished. Number one, I'd love participation. I'd love people from the community looking at our documentation and saying, oh my God, there's a typo there. I got to fix it. With a few GitHub skills, they now have access. They look at our documentation from a readability point of view and think, oh my gosh, I can make this clearer from my own point of view. They propose changes. We look at them and say, oh, duh, that's right. We accept them and make life easier for the rest of our community. And ideally, what I'd love are people who look at our documentation and say, I want to test it out and see if I can make this feature work with the documentation. If they can do it, we know we're successful. If they have suggestions, we'd love to hear them.
Jodie, what's it like working with open source here at NGINX?
I think I have a really interesting perspective on open source, both within NGINX and F5 at large. I've been here for about 10 years.
Wow.
Have the fun distinction of primarily having worked on open source during that entire period, which most people who think about F5 don't think about open source. But the fact is, we've had groups working in the open on collaborative projects for a really long time. So it was really fun to be able to come out of that space and start working on NGINX after the acquisition and really be able to have a forum to connect with users and be able to work on such a well-established and visible project.
Okay, so Jodie, what's your favorite non-NGINX open source project?
I have to say Hugo, which is the static site generator that we use to create our website. I've been pretty deep in their forums and had a lot of questions answered, and it's a really well maintained and well supported project.
Okay, how about you, Mike?
I love the group called OWASP. It's not an insect, it's the Open Web Application Security Project. You'd think security is something that's behind the curtain. They put it out front. They talk security with each other. I mean, there are literally dozens of them who are right now starting to create a top 10 vulnerability list for web applications. And they want your help too.
Very, very cool. Okay, So they're doing this really cool thing for documentation. I remember the community is going to actually love this because documentation, like I said, it drives community forward and it drives projects forward for this. Where can they find you? Are you on GitHub? Where are you?
We're on GitHub. It's easy to get to. github.com/nginx/documentation. Go there, ideally with a GitHub account, and you can start participating. You can open up our discussions. You can open up an issue. If you find a problem or something you want to make better, you can open a pull request.
And we would appreciate a star, guys. If you get a chance to go out there, like our project, let us have a star so that other people can also discover the importance of really good documentation. With that, I'd like to thank both of y'all for joining us here on this NGINX Community Chat, this really exciting announcement about open source and documentation here at NGINX. If you want to find out more information about what's coming, we're going to have a special Bits and Bytes session on the documentation project with Mike. If you have more feedback, if you've got your own ideas, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And once again, may the open source be with you.